Good evening or good afternoon, as the case may be. I'm Bob Marshall from LakeCAM, and this is our latest edition of Lakeville Voices. And today we are happy to have with us our interim superintendent, Dr. Kristine Nash. And she's graciously given us some time to answer some questions about our school district. Dr. Nash, would you please tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you get here? What were your travels along the way?
Sure, thank you. I have began my career as a classroom teacher. Taught both at the secondary level, at middle school and high school. I was an English language arts teacher at the middle school, began my career in Marshfield, and then spent a good chunk of my career as a classroom teacher in East Bridgewater Public Schools. After a long period of time in the classroom, I decided that I might like to try an administrative position, or felt that the challenges then were more professional for me, and made the decision to move on to administration. I spent 4 years as a building administrator in Middleborough at their high school. And then from that, my career pathway took me to become the school district's director of curriculum and professional development for a period of approximately 4 years. At the end of that, I became the assistant superintendent of schools in Dover and Sherborne, and after that, in 2006, became the superintendent of schools in Hanover. And I retired from that position in 2013, January of 2013. So that has been my career, and if you add up the years, you'll see that it's quite numerous.
Well, and I think that's to our benefit. I have to, please, audience, forgive me, there was something disclaimer I neglected to mention at the beginning. For the sake of full disclosure, you should know that I spent 36 years teaching in this school system. And if any of you are interested in responding to anything that's said here, or have something to say about anything else, please feel free to contact us at LakeCAM. You can call us at 774-213-9594, or you can contact Alan Russell, our program director, Alan Russell at lakecam.tv. Sorry about that, folks. And thank you, Dr. Nash. Well, that's quite a trip you've had. And so you decided when you retired, I take it, that you needed something to keep you busy, and you decided to come to Freetown Lakeville to help us out.
I did. I was approached and knew about the opportunity, had some conversations. As they say, one thing led to another, and here I am. I might add also, if I could, that I did spend 15 years on a regional school committee. I was a regional school committee member for Old Rochester Regional School District, which is made up of the 3 towns of Marion, Mattapoisett, and Rochester. So certainly I think that helps me in the understanding of the uniqueness of regional school districts.
It does indeed. Just generally, how did you become interested in education as a profession in the first place?
My parents. I think who you are, in many ways, goes back to the way you were brought up and what your parents instilled in you. My parents had a strong belief in the key to being educated, and the fact that if you were educated, that doors would open to you. My parents were individuals who did not have the opportunity to go to college, and I think it was very important for them to ensure that their children, in this case me, that I would have that opportunity. So from early days, I knew that I was going to continue my career after high school. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to be, but there are always a few people who influence you in many ways. And one of those individuals, as they say, was my first grade teacher, Miss Baker, who I still remember. And I think that was an influence on me just at a very young age. And then as I went through my career in high school, I had the good fortune as a Whitman-Hanson graduate to have some very talented teachers, as there are in public schools everywhere, and they influenced me. In addition to that, certainly during the time that I grew up, there were pathways for people and one pathway for a young lady that was very different. And that was that teaching was a wonderful thing that one could do. And I chose that as a career. And 46 years later, I stayed in it. So I think that it's a testament to public education.
Very good.
And my parents.
Very good, thank you. Okay, speaking of superintendents, as you know, that whole process of the search ended last spring for us. And I'm sure the folks are curious as to where is that whole process now?
That's a very good question. The school committee will have on its agenda as a topic in August the discussion around the search for and the timeline for the new superintendent. So that will be discussed then. They will certainly start to make some decisions as to a process and timeline, or at least a timeline.
Okay, so they haven't, there's been no advertising for positions and so forth?
There's not been any discussion. They wanted to certainly have some time for the new members to come on board, which they have. And certainly, I think at this point in time, it's important for them to begin to outline a timeline for when they would want this position filled permanently.
Okay, very good, thank you. And again, speaking of superintendents, you certainly have a lot on your plate. As I look around, there are lots of new folks. And coming in as one of the newest kids on the block, how have you been able to wrap your head around all of this that is so new?
Two things. First of all, what has been a great benefit to me has certainly been my 7 years as a superintendent. Although school districts have nuances as to the way they do things, they certainly are not much different overall. But secondly, I had the opportunity to spend a little over a month as part of my entry plan overlapping the outgoing interim superintendent. So prior to my coming on board officially July 1st, that gave me an opportunity to really understand what the needs were of the district. And that's been very, very helpful for me.
Very good. Do you have, or would you say that you have a particular philosophy of education that you espouse that may be the same as, different from other folks?
My philosophy is pretty simple. It's one that I have always felt strongly about, and it really boils down to two key components. For me, first and foremost, all decisions are made about students. The second piece of this is that as a leader in the district, my chief concerns are always with equity, meaning how do we do things for all students, equity for all students, and excellence. How do we aspire to and achieve excellence in programming for our students? Simple words, but difficult sometimes to implement because of the restraints that we have, many times budgetary, and the restraints that we have certainly around capacity. But those have been what I have always fallen on the sword for. First and foremost, making decisions always in the best interest of students. Those decisions sometimes are not favorable for adults. And will they help us move to the goals of equity and excellence for students?
You've sort of answered this, I guess, a little bit. Have you had a role model or a mentor throughout your career, and what did she or he teach you?
I have. They say that being a superintendent can be pretty lonely. The more that you move up, the more removed you get, and your decisions certainly conversely impact more people. I've had a number of role models, and most of those have been administrators who were in the business for a long period of time that I had developed a collegial relationship with, and that I could pick up the phone and call. Former superintendents, current superintendents. When I became a superintendent for the first time, part of the ease for me at least was knowing that I could pick up the phone and call a few of my colleagues. One of the give-backs in this profession generally is that I think we are pretty united as administrators to help each other and mentor each other. And though that happens formally for new superintendents, informally is sometimes what you need on an ongoing basis. So having that has been helpful, and I've had a number of very, very supportive people, strong people who are my friends, happen to be in these positions, who helped me along the way.
Can you give us just a little bit of a breakdown of where the technology plan sits at this point? I realize you haven't had much chance to wrap your head around that, but for example, do we think that it will be ready for when school opens?
The plan, which included the override for the infrastructure, should be up and set and ready to go. There was an update provided to the school committee at one of its prior meetings in June by our IT director. And the next steps, of course, in any long-range plan for upgrading technology after the infrastructure would be looking at hardware. So that would be something that would be part of the next plan, whether it's done by the permanent superintendent with a committee and stakeholders, and looking at that and making some recommendations for how we move forward.
Right, and that plan was presented by Craig McAmer, our IT director, at the previous meeting. Alan, do you remember the date of that school committee meeting? Was that was it in June or July? Well, in any event,
June meeting.
At the June meeting by Craig McAmer. And folks, if you want a little bit more detail on that, you can consult that. I know that's still on our LakeCAM channels. Okay, this is a difficult question, especially for someone who is so new to the district, I'm sure, and feel free to answer it however you wish. You may or may not be aware that trust has been a bit of an issue in town between the school committee and some members of the community and so forth. Some members in town have been concerned that, you know, we passed the debt exclusion for the technology plan for $900,000. Lakeville recently passed an override. Freetown had to contribute a corresponding increase in the budget and so forth. And yet there remains some, what some people feel are disconnects between the school committee and some of the townsfolk and so forth. Budget misunderstandings, the abrupt stopping of the superintendent search, the community speak section and so forth. I don't expect you to answer each one in specifics, but how can we go about resolving some of these issues?
There are three distinct issues, but probably all related to communication and ensuring that the mode of communication, the means of communication remain strong. Certainly with respect to the superintendent search, while I wasn't privy to that, the school committee is charged with the superintendent search and the selection of the superintendent, and ultimately it was their decision to not continue with their search. That's not atypical, I can tell you from my experiences, that school committees find that when they get to a point in time that candidates may drop out and that they may not have a pool of candidates that they feel is what they want. So while I think it presents challenges and people are many times upset that it ends abruptly, I can tell you, having served on a school committee as a member of the old Rochester Regional School Committee, that many times that happened to us in our search, and I think I probably did 3 searches. So it's not atypical. I just think that being as clear when the search begins as to the process so that people understand that it could come to this helps at least for people to understand that there is that possibility. And again, I'm not privy to all the nuances of the search. With respect to the budget process, or the budget, and building trust, again, processes for budget have to be very open. They are by law open. All of the meetings for budget discussions are public meetings. They are long, they are tedious. The school committee makes many decisions. The budget process typically in some districts can start in October and doesn't really end until it goes before a town meeting, or meetings in this case, for approval. So you're spending a good chunk of your year. And oftentimes, stakeholders, community members, staff members, town members are coming in at different points in that process. So they are not getting the entire picture, if you will. Having said that, I think it's important to make sure that our stakeholders are on board. If typically a process involves liaisons with FinCom committee members, then you want to make sure that they're involved in that process with respect to understanding timelines, potential budget concerns that may happen. Ultimately, the school committee's job is to support and bring forward an educationally sound budget. And it is the voters who make that decision as to what they can or cannot afford. And I think that's where the challenges come in. How do we continue with a certain level of service when the vehicle to do that is through property taxes and through the local towns, and that's the difficulty. But the only way that you really can get around that is to advocate for your needs. You always advocate for what you need, and ultimately the decisions as to whether or not those needs will be met, as far as through a budget and a figure, come when the budget gets voted. The decisions as to what gets in a budget and what does not really rest with the school committee. And part of the role of the administration, including the superintendent, is to provide as enough information as possible so that school committee members make sound decisions. So when they make a decision to cut a program, to increase class size, they know exactly the implications of that, and the public knows that. And then the public certainly has an opportunity at all of our meetings to express concerns. It's important for them to do that because the school committee may consider doing something different. There may be nuances that they had not thought about before, and it's important to be heard. It's important that people, all stakeholders, be heard. And then ultimately, the decision rests with the school committee as to what they will include in the budget and what the final figure will be. And again, having along the way the connections back to town managers or administrators, to your finance and selectmen, knowing potentially what the challenges are in the towns, what other things are going on. We share a budget. We happen to be, as most school districts, the biggest piece of a town's budget, and we recognize that. There are other needs besides schools, and we certainly don't want to erode those issues around police, fire, and safety. They're all critical needs. So it's a process. And your third question was really about...
Well, actually, you lead right into a part of what I mentioned and my next question, the issue of community speaks.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned just a moment ago how important it was for the school committee to have that kind of input from townsfolk, whether it be through community speaks or what have you. And I know that for some people, myself included, there have been some issues around this. I remember the time, in my opinion, not so very long ago, when folks were able to raise a hand, be able to address an issue, and give some input and hear some feedback from school committee administrators, etc. And it seems as though now that's in some state of flux. I'm not sure where it's going to end up. And I guess my question wants to be, how can this problem be repaired, resolved, improved? Because it seems to me, I've heard people say they've written to school committee people and haven't received responses. As a matter of fact, I heard one school committee member mention on the LakeCAM broadcast that she apologized, she had something come up, and granted, those things happen and so forth. But how can we solve this problem?
I think there are two distinct but related issues that you refer to. One is when the communication is written via email and how that is dealt with when it's directed to a school committee or a superintendent or whatever. The second one is at a school committee meeting, the public speaks section or public comments section. So let me address each of those. With respect to emails, the school committee has established a practice relatively new with having a general email box for people to send concerns when they are watching at home or after the fact they're watching maybe 2 weeks later. and can voice a concern or a question. That goes directly and then gets redirected. If it's a question that is under the purview that can be answered by a school committee chair, then that would be answered. If not, it would be redirected to the superintendent, and I would get back to that individual. So we hope that we can make sure that we get back to that person. Oftentimes, your aim is within 48 hours, unless there's some kind of an emergency that comes up, and that does happen.
Sure.
With respect to at a meeting, a school committee meeting, all school committees have an opportunity for the public to speak. That can come generally at the beginning, and in many instances, they may even have policy with respect to the amount of time that someone can speak. Part of the reason that they have a limit, it's been my experience, is that these are their business meetings, and oftentimes when they don't limit, the issues become time issues. So I think that's a challenge, and that's something that is directed by either a policy and or in some instances where no policy exists, it would be a practice. And that may change from chair to chair. But
that's confusing for folks,
right.
so I have to confess.
If there's no policy. I think there is a policy with respect to community speaks, that section. I think one of the challenges is the balance of discussion and what that discussion relates to. There's an opportunity, I know, in this district, or there was an opportunity, still is an opportunity for individuals to speak about issues on the agenda. The difficulty in getting into discussions when it's a business meeting with a set agenda with topics, and that's the reason why under the open meeting law you post an agenda with specific topics, so that individuals who may have concerns or questions can come to a meeting, know that that topic is being discussed. I think the challenge for a school committee and or the administration is to be asked a question where it's not a topic on the agenda that evening, doesn't mean it's not a viable topic. And when you say to an individual, we either do not have that information, we need to get back to you. I think on the whole, that may be interpreted as we're not going to respond to you, and that's not the case. Oftentimes, when a topic comes up that might have been discussed at a meeting prior to, is not on the agenda, or is totally unrelated, then generally school committee chairs will direct that to the superintendent and say, the superintendent will contact you either to set up a meeting to discuss that. And I think what people are looking for is not to be dismissed.
I agree.
They're at a meeting, they're there because they have concerns. So I would always say to people, you don't have to go to a school committee meeting to express concerns. I've always made, my door was always an open door. If someone from the public called up and wanted to express a concern and wanted to meet with me, I never said no. So I think sometimes people feel that the only vehicle for their mechanism is that they must show up at a school committee meeting and speak. And certainly there's a time when they want to do that and they should do that, and that's a place. But I want them to understand that they can also call our office and speak with me. If it's an issue around a building issue and they want to speak with the building principal, they have that vehicle too. So those avenues have to be open, and they certainly are, as long as I'm sitting here in this chair, that they will have that opportunity. So that's oftentimes what happens at a meeting. The discussion or the topic that's brought up may not be timely, it may be important, and it certainly needs to be addressed or at least heard by the individuals who either are in charge of the school district or who are charged with the authority as a school committee is under their purview. And to find ways to do that so that there's a flow to the meeting doesn't get interrupted for long periods of time, and that the school committee members can accomplish the task of the evening, which is the agenda. So I would say to you, it's a balancing act for committee chairs, but it also is very important that we hear the stakeholders. These are the people who approve our budgets. These are the people that have a right to know. These are the individuals who support us, who are strong supporters of education. And when you cut them off very quickly, that leaves a bad taste. And I hope that sometimes doing that is not because school committee do not want to hear from you. It's simply that they have a very lengthy agenda, or the topic was one that they may not be prepared to answer. It doesn't mean they can't answer it, and they can't find the information to answer it. And therefore, sometimes by redirecting it, that can happen. But I would say, oftentimes it's better to pick up the phone and have your question maybe answered before you even get to the meeting, because the feeling when you get to a meeting and your question isn't answered is they don't want to listen to me. And that, that typically shouldn't be the case and shouldn't be the image that we project, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree with you more. I applaud that approach. Now, during your answer, Dr. Nash, you mentioned that there was a general email box. Is that something different than writing directly to the school committee person?
Yes, it's directing it through the chair, but it's directing it, I think it's schoolcommittee@freelake.org.
Okay.
But
schoolcommittee@freelake.org.
And
right.
if it bounces back, contact my office and we'll give you the exact email.
Very good, very good.
Okay.
And the reason I bring this up, and I don't want to belabor it too much, over the last couple of years, it's been my experience and that experience of others that there's been some serious confusion about how or if a person can speak at a school committee person. But I think I see, based on what you just said and from what I've seen recently through policy change or discussion, that I hope is changing to a more positive approach.
They can certainly always, I think, indirectly, members of the community are going to speak to members of the school committee. They see them out in the parks, they see them at field events with their children, and those are the kind of the informal ways. But if directly they want a response back from the school committee as a whole, then directing it to the email address I gave you, and or picking up the phone and speaking to me directly or setting up an appointment if they feel more comfortable are two mechanisms that will get them a response. It may be that we may say we need to gather some information and get back to you on that,
Sure.
but it will give them another opportunity other than having to come to a school committee meeting and be heard there and find that maybe they don't get a response to a question that may not be on the agenda that evening. And that's the difficulty oftentimes.
Sure.
They're coming for some other issues. Those issues may not be issues that are going to be addressed that evening. And when you hear public comments, it doesn't mean that they can't bring them up. And it may, for example, someone could bring up an issue around busing, and therefore the committee could direct the superintendent to come back with a report or to sit and have a meeting with that individual to find out what the real issue is, and if there's an issue, bring it back to them. Right. So generally, there's kind of a mechanism to do that and a process.
Very good, thank you. Well, something completely down a different path. As I'm sure you are well aware, the public may not be, this fall, schools all over the state are going to have a new teacher evaluation system. And it's pretty intense, if I may say so. And I'm curious, in your opinion, how will this new evaluation system, could you speak to how it will be implemented and how it will impact the education our children will receive? What changes will we see?
Actually, the new educator evaluation system was implemented in Freetown, Lakeville last year.
That was a year ahead of what was required?
No, it was actually in keeping with, it was a tiered approach from the state. If you were a race to the top district, you implemented it last year. Right. And so we initially implemented it last year. The instrument needed to be negotiated in accordance with the state law for the instrument. And there are other elements of it that still will be bargained this year, namely district determined measures, it's my understanding. So part of what needed to happen under the requirements of the regulations were training for administrators, training for teachers. It is my understanding that happened last year. And this year, actually, from my perspective, with the almost complete turnover in administrators at the building level, we actually will be focusing at our summer retreat on implementing in our full year the new evaluation instrument that was bargained in this district. So administrators will go back to it. We'll be looking at calibration of what they call the teacher rubrics, understanding that we have an instrument that was bargained with timelines, with a process, and that we will need to look at and determine district-determined measures which are a part of that and have not been bargained yet. The goal of the instrument, in my eyes, is really to bring and improve teaching and learning. Like anything else, it is one of the state mandates that does not come with any funding. And as superintendents,
a topic near and dear to my heart.
As superintendents will tell you across the state that they're struggling with the costs that are associated with implementing this instrument. Training costs, obviously negotiating the instrument is a cost associated with that. Certainly the actual purchase of and implementation of district-determined measures could have significant costs, and storing that information and then reporting it back to the state, which is part of the requirements, 7 elements that need to be reported back. That's why most school districts over the last 5 to 7 years have started to move, even prior to the new educator evaluation instrument, have started to move to hire data managers because of the sophistication. This is one more reason why a district needs to have a data manager. Just the process that we will eventually have to follow of reporting back 7 categories of ratings, or 7 categories or elements of the evaluation system and our individual results to the state will be a daunting task, at least as I understand it. But the overall reason that an evaluation system that is statewide gets implemented is hopefully to improve teaching and learning, to provide opportunities for us to look at what best practices are occurring with what teachers, to help all students struggling as well as high achieving reach and achieve student growth. Individually, our districts created their own instruments years ago. We're now all held to the same standards, so we're now all held to similar benchmarks with respect to a new educator evaluation instrument.
Very good. One of the things that comes to mind, since this process is so involved, is that this is, and because it's so new, that it's going to be very difficult for administrators to get into the classrooms as much as they need to, and also do all of the other elements of their jobs that really won't be able to wait. Do you think, I don't know what my question wants to be, how are the administrators supposed to get all of this done in a workday?
That's a great question. I think it's the struggle that most administrative teams and districts have had to deal with. Part and parcel of the new instrument requires that the individual who goes in to supervise and evaluate, obviously, be someone who has an understanding and has training. And in many districts, the movement that I have seen is to take some positions that currently exist in school districts, such as department heads, and reconfigure those positions so that the responsibilities are such that they now include some aspects of supervision and evaluation. Having said that, the difficulty is that from a union perspective, that having teachers evaluate their peers presents some challenges. So districts that I have been familiar with have tried to find ways that they can create positions that don't put either side in a position where there is either a discomfort level or a concern about that. We are moving forward with some reconfigurations for those people who will be watching the school committee meeting from this past week. The school committee has approved to reconfigure the 612 coordinator positions to less positions who are not to exceed what was budgeted. And I think in doing that, we'll have that ability because they will be people who are 1.0 administrators for, in one case, ELA, foreign language and history at 612 level, and in the other case, science, engineering, and mathematics, 612. That will help to alleviate some of the time that is needed to do this. To do this well, you're exactly right. Administrators will need to give up something. And what oftentimes enters into the mix is all of the elements of running a building, the unexpected elements that arise during the day.
Just like that.
And so this is a challenge. And that's the reason why many school districts have moved to reconfigure positions they have. One of the reasons why we looked at it as an addition, as well as a budgetary.
Okay, well, we've already talked about a lot of challenges facing Freetown and Lakeville. Could you identify maybe what you think is the largest challenge facing, or one of them?
Mm-hmm. For me, it has been ensuring that we fill personnel right now at this point in time. It's making sure that we fill all of our positions, certainly before the start of school. We've had a great deal of administrative turnover. So the first thing that I need to do is to ensure that all of the people who lead the district are in place. We recently filled the assistant superintendent for teaching and learning position. Prior to that, as you know, the high school principal position was filled. The director of finance, human resources, and facilities was filled. We are in the process, and we filled the elementary principal at Assawamsett. We are in the process of completing the search for the Freetown elementary principal, and I hope that by the end of this month, we'll either have a person in place for that position. We have some assistant principal positions, so getting all of those, and then we have numerous positions, particularly at the high school level, in teaching positions. So getting those positions filled, so when we open our doors, we do not have any positions unfilled. We have some positions in our custodial staff due to retirement and due to budget that need to be filled. So getting all of those is right now the primary task as a superintendent that I see that I have, and getting the right people in the right positions, getting the very best people in to do those positions. The second one after that will be sitting with the school committee chair and the members of the subcommittee, probably the vice chair and community members on some of the committees, to look at and to start to outline a budget process. Not getting into any of the details of it, but to outline a very specific budget process. And that will be certainly a critical piece of my work and the administrator's work, as well as the school committee's work. So the third piece that is as important as anything else is looking at teaching and learning. We have some great opportunities that were begun in this district with new positions and new job descriptions, with para-interventionists, with technology integration specialists. We need to make sure through the assistant superintendent position and through our building administrators and our other leaders in the buildings that we have a plan for how all of these individuals work collectively together. So this year we're hiring a new literacy staff person at Grace, as well as a reading specialist. We already have those positions at our elementary schools. one of the things that I would want us to look at is to look at bringing all of those stakeholders together. For example, looking at how they work in their buildings now at the elementary level, and how we see this transitioning and what work looks like for those people in literacy as the literacy coach and the reading specialist at Grace. Looking at programming is critical. We also have a brand new director of student services, so there's been a great deal of change in the district. And my fourth important task is really to build and work with a new leadership team. Someone said almost 80% of the school district, as far as leadership, is turned over. So one thing that I can do is to try to create stability with this team and to try to ensure the community, including the staff and everyone, that there is a sense of constancy, stability, and a plan for us as we move forward with respect to educating their students. And that's a critical piece for me to make sure.
I think we would all welcome that, very much so. You mentioned a lot of what I was going to ask in my next question, but what can you tell us about where all of that hiring stands at this point? We've hired someone for Assawamsett. We still need to do that for Freetown Elementary. Sure. We have somebody for the Director of Student Services?
Yes.
That was formerly Special Ed Director? Would that be correct? Okay. Do we have somebody for the Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning?
We do. Dr. Natalie Dunning was hired. The positions, the administrative positions still left open are the Freetown Elementary Principal, which I indicated hopefully I can conclude by the end of July, and an Assistant Principal position at the high school.
Okay.
All other positions from an administrative point of view have been filled.
Very good. Well, you've been pretty busy.
I have.
And I suspect you're going to be even busier between now and the end of the school year. What can parents and townspeople in general do to help make our schools better?
Being informed. I think the best in being concerned, and that's not to say that they're not either, but the better the question they ask, the more informed typically you tend to be. And oftentimes, I think when we ask communities to make very tough decisions about very large sums of money, the more informed you are, the better. It's not any different than when you go out and you purchase a new home. It's probably one of the largest purchases that you make. The largest, if not, purchase that you make. And I don't think anyone makes that purchase in a way that doesn't show that they haven't done a lot of homework. And so I would say to people, being as informed as you can be about the schools, asking the right questions, and having that combination generally brings a better understanding of the needs of the school district. Knowing that you're always struggling to improve, knowing that most school districts are looking to never be settled with just being okay, that they want to be better than okay, and understanding a little bit about the history of the school district, when we oftentimes live from budget to budget and we forget what's happened over the last 6 years. I moved into a district that many people would consider as superintendent of schools was a somewhat affluent district, yet for the time that I was there, I cut positions every year. And that provided us with a level of service that looked very different. So when we talk about what we do in the classroom, oftentimes that gets lost in the mix. People understand the large elements of class sizes and how that will impact. But when we start talking about delivering services differently to students, that sometimes is the area that's the most critical for us in education. What goes on in the classroom? What does teaching and learning look like? What are the new demands? Why do we need more money in professional development? what's happening with the new educator evaluation system that requires some changes or has a cost associated with it. Why are we bringing in interventionists? Why do we have a literacy coach? Understanding those nuances, if you can, I think gives you a better understanding of how schools operate. It's pretty easy to understand. It costs us X amount of dollars for buses. It costs us X amount of dollars for salaries, but it's really understand the totality of a budget. So I would say that that's something that would be helpful.
Very good. Well, before we conclude, I don't know, maybe we've covered everything, but if you had one message that you'd like to get out to parents, kids, in the community, what might it be?
First and foremost, I would say to recognize that change is not always a negative, that change can be very positive, that change happens over a period of time, it doesn't happen overnight, that the critical factor that I believe that unites all of us is doing what's best for students. Whatever that looks like, I'm one of those people who believes that most people want to do what's best for students, whatever that takes. And I would say that I don't see Freetown or Lakeville communities to be any different. The members of the community, the parents, the administrators, the teachers, I think we all ultimately have the same goal, to do what's best for students. And if we think that way, and we put aside all of the other pieces of that come to that table often, then I think we'll make good decisions. And that's what I would ask people to do, to just go back and think about, is this best for students? Because I do believe we all want that. And we will have differences, and I expect that. And we will not be able to fund some things. I understand that. But I think as long as the decisions are made in the best interest of students and not adults, that I think we're in a much better place. So I would hope that, and I believe that that's what the people of Freetown and Lakeville believe, because I'm an idealist and I believe that in public education we do a terrific job. And I would say that people have great faith. They've always had great faith in public education in Massachusetts, and in the way that from a federal point of view, that we have said that public education is a local mandate, locally run. And so that's very different than what we see in other countries. So I would say just to make those decisions about students and to make sure that you leave all of the other pieces of that at the table or at the door, if you will. And I believe that that's what most people do.
Very good, very good. Well, Dr. Nash, I want to thank you for
welcome.
being here with us and letting the folks know a little bit about who you are and what your thinking is. We welcome you here.
Thank you.
We're glad to
excited.
have you. We're excited as well.
I'm excited.
And we certainly want to extend to you our welcome. And also, if LakeCAM can be of any service, please, as you and I have discussed before.
I certainly think, if I might add, that as we get into the budget process, I would welcome an opportunity to come back and have some discussion about that. I think that becomes another vehicle for us to be able to open the channel of communication. So I really hope that we will have that opportunity.
Well, our door is always open for you, and if there's at any time, there is a time that we might not be aware of that you are, that we can help out, please let us know. And to the folks watching, again, if you've got anything that you want to add to this, please contact Alan Russell at LakeCAM.tv, and the phone is 1-774-213-9594. And we thank you all for watching. Thank you, Dr. Nash.
You're welcome.